In the show me state, when you ask your politicians, how you've done, they have to be able to show you what they've done. This next individual has been leading true reform in the Missouri legislature, reforming welfare, reforming Medicaid, making sure that they're solvent and save, protect, and preserve them for future generations. This is one of the up-and-coming stars in the Missouri legislature. Ladies and gentlemen, Casey Guernsey.
Good afternoon, CPAC. What an honor to be chosen by such an organization to address you today as a member of the House of Representatives from Missouri. I'm from the northwest part of the state and was raised on a dairy and beef farm. I'm tremendously blessed to have the opportunity to serve in Missouri for a number of reasons. We've got a legislature that was set up by some particularly wise founding fathers. We listen to what goes on in Washington on a daily basis, and we're largely astounded by the things that actually can be run with such little common sense, without scruples or responsibility. In Missouri, we've got three things that go for us that could fix Washington's problems in a hurry. One, we balance the budget every year, which means we don't go into debt and we don't engage in dangerous experiments like President Obama in attempting to spend our way into prosperity. Since I've been in office, we have an excellent exercise of the state by cutting the fat whenever we actually lose revenue every year. I could actually think off the top of my head, or we could cut an additional $1 billion and none of us would feel the difference in this room. We've only spent as much money as we take in, and because of the supermajority of conservatives, we've created a situation, because of conservative budgeting principles, where we can afford to cut taxes for every single Missourian in Missouri, something we haven't done in almost 100 years. We know the only way to grow the economy is to allow businesses to keep more of their money. But unfortunately, we've got a governor that would much rather play politics, lie to the citizens of the state of Missouri, hold education hostage, and veto this historic legislation. Governor Nixon, Kansas, and Oklahoma, thank you for your actions. We're not done. We'll go back in January, we'll roll up our sleeves, we'll write a new proposal, and we'll cut taxes. I'm firmly convinced by the time we're done. Number two, we've got a legislature that's only in the Capitol 5 months out of the year. It limits the damage that can be done to taxpayers of this state whenever their legislators stay home more often than they're at the Capitol. We work on our priorities and we go home to work in the district, and it's how we in Missouri legislature respond quickly to the citizens of Missouri. We listened and we heard when the citizens spoke twice at the polls not to expand Medicaid, not to set up exchanges, and not to work towards Obamacare that's being shoved down our throat by the federal government. I believe strongly that the legislature listened, and we voted down every single time liberal Governor Nixon proposed to expand Medicaid as our exchange in the state of Missouri, and we're not going to accept it again. The governor is opposed to cutting taxes because he's afraid we'll have less money to set up an exchange, which is an expansion of Medicaid. And did you know that welfare in this state we spend as a percentage more than most states at 47% of our budget? How can Governor Nixon sit in his office and in good conscience demand that we increase a program we have no way of knowing how it can be funded, when the state will actually have to begin funding it, and completely giving control of our health care to the federal government? Where does he believe the added expense will be made up of expanding this disastrous program, Medicaid? It would have to be education funds, as it's the only other option, which takes up 33% of Missouri's budget. It's our duty as legislators to set Missouri up with an exemption for Obamacare. President Obama has already exempted or granted waivers numerous times, and the whole bill is littered with exemptions. For crying out loud, Congress and their staff are exempted from this bill. How can we in good conscience in the legislature aid and abet President Obama by expanding Medicaid and setting up exchanges rather than fighting for our state, reforming Medicaid, and seeking a waiver? We've got to force Washington, D.C. to come to the negotiating table, not roll over and cede health care to the federal government. We have federally elected officials in Washington who represent us in Missouri, and I expect every single one of them to fight for our state, work with our state legislature to get that waiver from Obamacare that we need to, and prevent the expansion of Medicaid as an exchange in the state of Missouri. We can write solutions to Missouri's health care problems better than Nancy Pelosi. Many of my colleagues probably won't agree with me when I say this, but the number 3 reason why we have such an outstanding model for government in Missouri is that we have term limits in the legislature. Can you imagine if Washington had to work under such circumstances? They would have to prioritize, they would have to work overtime to get those priorities passed, and they would be forced to work together like we do in the state of Missouri. Some detractors of term limits say he doesn't give enough time to learn the process. 8 years is more than enough time to learn the process. Having been educated in the country's premier conservative work college, College of the Ozarks, I benefited from a conservative education that values hard work. It's why we've been able to make some serious reforms in Missouri that have been desperately needed for decades. One I'm particularly proud of having accomplished is prevailing wage reform. We might not have right to work, but for the first time, I sent a bill to the Senate that exempted prevailing wage from school construction and maintenance, and they actually sent a bill back to the House that was better. When's the last time that happened in Washington, D.C.? We changed a law that hasn't been touched for nearly half a century and allows local contractors to actually set the prevailing wage in each rural county. The school district that I live in hasn't raised taxes for as long as I've been alive on property for schools. We do need to build a new school, but because of these reforms for prevailing wage, for the first time we'll be able to get that done without raising taxes. Isn't that a novel concept? It is a real pleasure to be here today amongst my fellow conservative brethren, to talk to conservative office holders from around the country. I even found out last night in my first ever Cardinals game, I was sitting by the Secretary of State from Oklahoma, who happened to be from Albany, Missouri, which is in my district. It was a lot of fun. It is a real pleasure to be here today. Keep fighting the good fight. We're going to get things right in Missouri. If it takes a long time, but we'll only be able to do it if we all work together. Thanks again.